What happens when management follows rules instead of logic? I was working remotely for a European company that built high-end broadcast processing equipment. My division handled the most advanced and technical products, very niche, very dependent on complicated configurations. The engineers and developers in Europe were brilliant, and we all got along great. We were total tech nerds who could talk for hours about IP ranges and capacitor values. The US office, however, only handled sales orders from Europe. They had a few good basic techs, but no one who could do deep troubleshooting. That was the whole reason my job even existed. Around this time, the company was preparing for an acquisition, and auditors began checking every department. We were told to submit a full inventory list of all computers and test equipment. I didn't think much of it. Now, the setup-dependent part is important. I was in the middle of a huge project with one of the biggest broadcasters in the US. This project had already led to one of the largest upgrade sales our division had ever made. I was also testing new SNMP features fresh from the developer's sandbox. SNMP is old tech, but still widely used. To test the new features safely, I pulled an old Supermicro 1RU server from my workshop. It was something I barely used except for remote access tests, but it was perfect for basic SNMP checks. I needed to make sure the new update wouldn't break anything before it went live on over 50 stations. The process was simple. Every morning I got a new software revision, tested it, and sent results to my tech contact at the network by the end of my day. Easy for me, but extremely niche. No one else in North America had any clue how this stuff worked. Then the auditors saw the Supermicro server on the list. Suddenly the US office acted like the world was ending. Why is there a server in the field? Why do you need so much test equipment? Who approved this? My first few explanations were completely ignored because no one there understood what I was talking about. They decided that the server had to be returned immediately. I told them 3 times that it was actively being used for a major project and asked who would take it over. Silence. They didn't care. They only cared about following their checklist. This old, beat-up server, worth maybe $1,000, was apparently their top priority. The day I was supposed to box it up, I was feeling extra snarky, so I wrote a cheerful email to the US tech team, the decision makers, and my contacts at the network. I introduced everyone and thanked the US office in advance for taking over this critical, time-sensitive testing phase. I explained how their help would free me up to work on other urgent projects. About 25 minutes later, I sent out tracking numbers for all the equipment I was supposed to return. I still didn't pack the server. An hour later, I got a strange email from one of the US decision makers. Without admitting they didn't understand anything about the project, he suggested that maybe I should bring the US techs up to speed before we make any final changes. They suddenly realized this was a huge account, and more big sales were possible. Losing this client could hurt their bonuses. I simply replied with the tracking numbers again and reminded him that I had suggested training the techs 3 times already. About 25 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the head tech from the US office, sounding completely panicked. He and his boss had just gotten a very enthusiastic call from the network's executive. They praised my work, said they were thrilled someone else would be testing updates so I could be on site more often, and talked about big future plans. Then they asked the obvious question, so who is taking over this testing now? Now they cared. I calmly repeated that I had raised this issue 3 times, so clearly their decision must have been well informed. Panic erupted at the US office. Knowing this, I sent a message to the European developers telling them to send new firmware revisions to the US tech team instead of me because they would be handling the testing from now on. This triggered the exact reaction I wanted. The head of development in Europe immediately called the US decision maker, asking who they had hired, without approval, to handle these advanced tests. By the time UPS was supposed to pick up the return shipment, the urgent need for that old server magically disappeared. No one ever mentioned it again.